Good evening, and thank you for your patience. Always a good reminder to turn off your cell phones. I ask all of you to please do so or turn them to vibrate. Welcome to the debate for the Democratic primary election for the 16th House District in the Connecticut General Assembly, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Greater Hartford. We are pleased to bring you this nonpartisan voter service for the 2022 election with the cooperation of the candidates. I am Deb Poland, and this is Eileen Leo of the League of Women Voters of Greater Hartford, and we will serve as co-moderators for this debate. The debate will be conducted in a modified cumulative time format. Each candidate will have a total of approximately 20 minutes of response time during the debate to answer posed questions either briefly or at length, depending on his or her preference for each topic. This is an alternative to specifically timed responses and rebuttals, and it allows for a more conversational exchange on each topic. Each candidate has a league timer who periodically will hold up signs indicating time remaining. And I just remind the candidates, your timer is here, your timer is there. Perfect. Candidates are encouraged to respond to one another's differences as they perceive them, understanding that the clock is running. We ask candidates to keep their responses to the issues involved and to refrain from any personal attacks.
Okay. Questions have been prepared by the League of Women Voters of Greater Hartford, and candidates have not been provided with the questions in advance. We also have the opportunity for questions from the audience. So to our audience members, please write down your questions on the index cards that have been provided, and our league screeners will send questions up to us to ask the candidates. Audience questions should be relevant to the House seat and not concern town or federal issues. We ask that the audience hold its applause during the debate and remain quiet so that others can hear the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. The order of speaking was determined by lottery. And now it is our pleasure to turn this over to the candidates who have committed their time and energies to this important aspect of the democratic process, running for elective office. First, we will hear from Mr. Eric Wellman.
Thank you, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. Thank you. It's so great to see a full house tonight, and thank you to Ms. Osborne for agreeing to this debate. I wanted to begin by extending my deepest condolences to Mike Payne. Mr. Payne and I served for 4 years as colleagues on the Board of Selectmen. He's the Republican challenger in this race, and his wife recently passed away. So he and his family have been in my thoughts. As we look at what's happening across our country right now, it's really quite extraordinary. Inflation is at a 40-year high. The Supreme Court, the highest court in our land, is rolling back our freedoms, the right to an abortion, the right to live free of the violence of guns, our ability to effectively fight climate change. What that means for us is that state legislatures across the country are going to be taking a leadership role on these issues and other issues like never before. I have the experience. I've served for almost 5 years on Simsbury's Board of Selectmen, most of that time as first selectman. I also have the electability. I've won 3 contested elections, each of which by a wider and wider margin. In fact, 4.5 years ago, I defeated the Republican challenger in this race in a head-to-head election. I also have the professional experience. I served as a host and a journalist in the National Public Radio system for the first half of my career. I held politicians and the powerful accountable. Since then, I've earned an MBA, and I work in business, helping organizations work more efficiently and more effectively. I brought that expertise to my public service on Simsbury's Board of Selectmen, and I hope with your support I'll be able to bring it to the state of Connecticut in the General Assembly. I look forward to your questions. I am really glad to be at this forum and look forward to a productive debate.
Okay, thank you. Now we will hear from Ms. Melissa Osborne.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric, for your comments, and thank you again to the League for inviting us here tonight and And thank you for hosting. I've always enjoyed the League of Women Voters candidate forums when I participated in them in the past in Canton. I'm running tonight to be state representative because right now, the only priority for Democrats in this primary is choosing the Democrat who can most successfully defeat the Republicans in the fall. We are facing an unprecedented time when the Supreme Court has eviscerated all of the core democratic values that we share. And we know that more values, more rights are about to fall. And while it's important to work with our Republican colleagues after they're elected, elections and appointments have consequences. And we need a proven leader with a long track record of commitment to the democratic values that we share, and somebody who can take a hit, get back up, and get right back in the ring. And we all know that I'm that person. More importantly, we all know that I am the strongest candidate to put up against the Republicans this fall. I've been willing to step up for the hard races that no other Democrat would run, seats that have never been won by a Democrat, in order to further our values and principles that we share as Democrats. And in so doing, I became the highest Connecticut Democrat vote getter in any race in Simsbury history, in any opposed race in Simsbury history. And I did that in a general election, going up against a very popular Republican incumbent, and that is exactly the situation we are facing this year. And I have 10 seconds left, so I'll wrap.
Thank you. We're going to move now to the question part of the debate, and so I'll ask our timers to set the time bank for 20 minutes. And as a reminder to audience members to refrain from applause or any other vocalizations during the debate. We want everyone to be able to focus on both the questions and the responses by both candidates. And we will alternate which candidate answers each question first. We will have each candidate answer every question that we do ask. We will try to get to as many audience questions as we can, but I suspect we will not get to all of them. But we're going to try to touch on a lot of different topics. So just know that that is the lens through which we're determining which questions to ask, to make sure that the voters here in this district are able to hear from the candidates on a variety of issues. And so with that, we're going to have the first question to go to Ms. Osborne first. The state just ended its fiscal year with about a $4 billion surplus. In other recent years, we've had deficits. Given these variations, what would you do in both the short term and long term regarding spending and taxes? Please be specific.
So for starters, I'm very proud of the fiscal responsibility that the Wellman administration has shown by paying down our pension debt. We're going to have a $440 million tax benefit coming to us in future years, and that will really start freeing up some resources for really important services that we've not been able to do in the past. That being said, this is a wealthy state. We're in a time of surplus, and I was door knocking maybe a month ago or so on one of the streets over in Weetog, and I spoke to a woman who was 78 years old. And long story short, she was out looking for a job because with national inflation, her fixed income, and her property taxes, she can no longer afford to stay in her home. And we are one of only 12 states that still taxes our seniors' Social Security income, any component of it. We're a wealthy state. That obligation falls to us as Democrats. We control both houses of the legislature and the governor's office. We can find a different way to close any perceived budget gap than on the backs of our seniors. Aging in place is a right and a benefit that we need to allow our seniors.
Thank you. Mr. Wellman?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Ms. Osborne that we need to stop taxing the state income tax on Social Security, and I think we even need to go further than that to help our seniors, and the state income tax on IRAs as well. I think about programs that were cut when we were in more lean times, critical programs like adult day programs for people with disabilities. Let's start by making those programs whole. But when I think about what we've been able to do on the Board of Selectmen here in Simsbury, while so many other towns around us have been forced to raise their taxes, we've kept taxes here in Simsbury nearly flat for the 5 years that I've been on the Board of Selectmen. And we've done that because we think and we plan about our long-term obligations, from our pensions to how we fund health care. So I wholeheartedly agree. I also was thinking about a door that I knocked just this past weekend, and a gentleman was telling me that he spent $1,000 recently to fill up his oil tank. $1,000. And people right now across Connecticut, the salaries are not keeping pace with what's happening with inflation, and we need to do absolutely everything that we can to make sure that Connecticut is affordable and remains affordable for everyone who wants to live here.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to an economic issue here about business incentives. And I'm going to start, Mr. Wellman, with you again, because Ms. Osborne went first before. Are Connecticut's business incentives structured appropriately to create jobs while being accountable to state taxpayers? What would you change, if anything, about our business incentives?
Yeah. I think about what we were able to do in Simsbury when we were approached, when I was first selectman, we were approached by Ensign Bickford. And they were interested in doing an expansion at their Simsbury campus or potentially at their campus in Colorado. And we were able to use incentives wisely in order to keep Ensign Bickford in Simsbury. They made a $10 million investment in their Simsbury campus, and in the process created 150 good-paying jobs, many of them engineering jobs. I think that when we do business incentives, it's problematic to the extent that we are creating winners through those choices and by default also creating losers. So I think that these are tools that we want to have, that we want to be able to use strategically. But when we essentially give tax dollars away to businesses, it makes it a little bit more expensive for everybody else who lives here. So it's a tool that we want to use sparingly and wisely.
Well, this is another subject that Mr. Wellman and I agree upon. When we pick winners and losers in business, it will be my preference that we're picking small businesses, which are the backbone of the Connecticut economy and of Simsbury's economy. So some of the things that small businesses are struggling with is the cost of insurance. The major insurance companies that Mr. Wellman works for have put in a 21% rate increase request this year. And I'll tell you, as a small business owner, I provide my own health insurance. As a breast cancer survivor, I cannot afford to scrimp on my health insurance. So for that privilege, just for me, I pay $1,100 a month for just my health insurance. So we've got to come up with some more equitable ways to allow small businesses to grow by providing health insurance that is within the reach of small businesses. It'll make small businesses more competitive in this very tight labor market as well. All small businesses are having difficulty retaining or even finding employees right now. And as a small business, you simply cannot compete with the benefits packages that are being offered by the large companies. And one of the things we really need to do is to make our small businesses competitive, both through benefits and insurance that's affordable for a small business to provide, not just for themselves, but for their employees as well. And we also need to look at the way that we're charging businesses for some of the same things that you and I get charged for here at home. The electric rate that small businesses are charged is actually double what we pay at home. And that has a benefit to certain politicians because that artificially keeps our prices lower, even though our prices feel completely out of control. But what that does is that it puts the cost of that on the backs of the small businesses, making Connecticut a little bit more business unfriendly when we need to be doing the opposite. So, I mean, I could go on forever about how we fund power, about how we fund and subsidize fossil fuels over clean energy power costs. But I would really put the incentives that we're thinking about into small businesses so that people here in this room can start their own business, can have the flexibility that comes with being a small business owner, and can really be competitive in the labor market as well.
Thank you. Our next question will start with Ms. Osborne. In many ways, Connecticut is still segregated, mostly due to the lack of affordable housing across the state, and that is true here in the 16th district as well. How do you think the legislature should address these issues?
Well, I'm really happy to say that there are some really active, important advocacy groups right now on the subject of affordable housing. They tend to have competing visions of how affordable housing should be addressed in this state. I have in the past supported the concept and the theory behind a particular group called Open Communities Alliance. Open Communities Alliance proposes a framework where every town takes its fair share, and every town which knows its town best and what its topography is and where its businesses are and where its needs are, and every town decides where that affordable housing fits the best in the framework of their town. That is the framework that I support. And it's an important thing because just 2 years ago, approximately 20% of the naturally occurring stock of housing in this town that turned over was in the affordable range, what would have been considered affordable were it deed restricted. And with the housing crisis that we've recently experienced, Simsbury is woefully behind and further behind on not just our actual affordable housing under the state statutes, but under naturally occurring affordable housing. And that's such a barrier to seniors aging in place here in Simsbury, to single parents, to people of more moderate incomes, which are fewer and fewer in our town. And it becomes an equity issue, not just in terms of the affordability of the housing itself, but in the access to the resources that a town like Simsbury can offer to a more diverse population. So I support affordable housing. Recently on zoning, I proposed an expanded version of accessory dwelling units that is greater than the accessory dwelling unit size that was proposed by the state legislation.
I think when we talk about an issue this complex, it's important to start with the definition. The way the state defines affordable housing in Simsbury is a home that's somewhere between $280,000 to about $300,000. That doesn't meet my definition of affordable. But then there's another category that would be low-income housing. And I think it's, when we're trying to solve any problem, it's important to define what exactly we're solving for. One of the things I like to do when we encounter a sticky problem is look at what has worked elsewhere, what is working elsewhere. So if we turn to the state of Massachusetts, they recently passed a bill that calls for transit-oriented development. And that means that any train station, commuter rail, there needs to be an affordable housing complex within half a mile of that train station. The state of Connecticut could do that around train stations going into New York City. Now, of course, that doesn't benefit Simsbury, but there's also legislation that's been floated that would provide smart incentives to communities like Simsbury to rezone areas near their downtown to provide what we call the missing middle, so things like duplexes, things like townhomes that are naturally by their nature going to be more affordable. And that's the kind of legislation I would be supportive of. And I am so pleased that the zoning commission here in Simsbury is taking steps to make our accessory dwelling unit regulations more accessible because, as Ms. Osborne pointed out, they benefit seniors, they also benefit people, adults with disabilities, and then just maybe young people who can't afford a full apartment but want to be able to break into Simsbury. So I think that this is a big challenge, it's a complex challenge, but it's something that we can tackle with meaningful legislation.
Thank you.
Moderator, is this a time where I can use some of my extra time?
Yes.
So, I think this is one of the areas where we can start pointing out some of the differences between Mr. Wellman and I on policy. And I don't support building things that are naturally affordable. One of the approaches being taken by one of the advocacy groups is to propose multifamily housing with no deed restriction, with no requirement of affordability, and that eventually the prices of everything will come down because multifamily housing by itself must be more affordable. And we all know here in Simsbury that that is not at all the case. We have many, many, many new apartment units, most of which cost more than most of our mortgages. So I don't support a naturally occurring model of affordable housing. There is a difference between low-income housing, which we have more of here in Simsbury than people probably even understand, and affordable housing. And both of those things are important. It's important for us to take our fair share. And the fair share model that is advocated by Open Communities Alliance actually comes out of a Supreme Court case out of New Jersey. And a lot of different states are looking at this in different ways. And we can quibble about what that fair share is, but I think that people who live here in Simsbury know Simsbury best and know the right place to put it so that we can support our residents here in Simsbury.
Thank you. Mr. Wellman, do you feel you would like to respond or?
Yeah, just that this is, this is why I think it's so good to listen to people with different perspectives, because I think that it's not either or. I think we can do both, and I think you made a really good case why we potentially should do both.
Thank you. Let's turn to another big issue these days, climate change. And Mr. Wellman, what will you do in the state legislature to address the looming threat of climate change?
Yeah, this is just such an important issue for me. Thanks for that question. Climate change, let's not make any mistake about it. This is the issue of our time. It poses an existential threat as last week we had temperatures here in the 90s. In the heat wave in Europe, heat kills. More than 1,000 people died across Spain and Portugal. What I've done on the Board of Selectmen, I was a proponent of the solar panels over the ice rink that saved $20,000 a year and provides all of the electricity for that facility. We converted our light bulbs in town buildings to energy-efficient light bulbs, saving our taxpayers $40,000 a year. And I was also, as first selectman, part of the team that negotiated what was at the time the largest solar deal in Connecticut history, and that was the Tobacco Valley Solar Project that I'm sure most people here are familiar with. At the state level, we need to be aggressive in fighting climate change, and that means providing smart incentives for e-bikes, electric vehicles, battery storage, solar panels. We need to expand what's known as solar access rights. This is basically telling homeowners associations, no, if one of your residents wants to put solar on their roof, they're allowed to put solar on their roof, for crying out loud. This is a crisis we're in. We need to continue to invest in offshore wind. I don't think that we can think bold enough and we can't think large enough. And let's also be clear that this is going to create green jobs, good paying jobs in the solar industry and other related industries as we put people to work. And the less we're relying on fossil fuels, the more that we're able to not have to be paying close to $5 a gallon at the pump. It frees us. So this is just an incredibly important issue that I think state legislatures across the country are going to need to be taking a critical leadership role on.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne?
Well, this is another policy area where Mr. Wellman and I get to agree, because the environment has long been an interesting topic for me. As far back as college, I was working at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And the first public service I gave here in the town of Simsbury was also serving on the Clean Energy Task Force, where we insulated low-income housing to increase the efficiency. We did solar panels on the roof at the high school and got funding for the energy audits around town to be more efficient. That being said, climate change in Connecticut is already here, right? We're seeing sea level change, we're seeing precipitation, we're seeing temperature and storm changes, and we have to have a plan at the state level. That's the job of the state rep. So we need, when we're looking at all the changes we're making to climate initiatives and mitigations, we have to do it through two lenses. We have to do it, number one, through an equity lens, because up to this date, the effects of climate change and the impact of environmentally insensitive actions that we have taken as a culture have not been equitably distributed. So whenever we're making these mitigation plans, we need to make sure that we're looking at it through that lens and through the lens of adaptation and resilience, because mitigation is only going to go so far, because climate change is already here. So we need to be planning and developing plans and strategies at the state level to adapt to the new climate and to increase our resilience. We need to make investments, both because it's good for the economy and because it's good for our health. Health impacts, especially in the lower income areas, especially in the areas that have been historically burdened by the impacts of our environmentally unfriendly actions, we need to address.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to transportation. I'm going to combine together a couple of questions. This one goes to you first, Ms. Osborne. What would you do to encourage complete streets, which allow for the usage of cars, pedestrians, and bicycles? And specifically, there's a question from the audience regarding the East Coast Greenway, which will go from, hopefully to go from Curtis Park to Terrafil Center, how you would help to move that project along.
So I'm glad I got this question, because I remember one of the first things that Mr. Wellman and I were talking about, this is probably 5-6 years ago, was the Greenway, completing the Greenway into Terrafil. And again, I come at that partially from an equity perspective. Terrafil is cordoned off. They don't have the same equitable access to environmentally friendly forms of transportation like biking and e-biking. And completing that Greenway would provide not just an equitable inclusion of Terrafil residents to the rest of the transportation options that we have here in Simsbury, but it will provide an opportunity for Simsbury residents to commute, because the path that goes through Terrafil right now is, but for the very best of in shape of us, is not accessible. I myself have an electric bike, and I got an electric bike because I live on Sand Hill, which is about this big, and I'm not in the kind of condition where I can get back up, but I'm only 3 miles from my office. So on days when I'm not on pickup duty, then I'm certainly using my e-bike in the summer in the decent weather. I'm not sure why we haven't gotten the Greenway connected yet. I know that the Bloomfield piece is about to be connected. That's exciting work, and I know that the next project that's going to start is going to be connecting into the park there. But that's one of the jobs that we'll be facing as state rep, which is partnering with our first select woman to find the resources at the state level to help get those projects going.
Thank you. Mr. Wellman?
First, Ms. Osborne, I'm super jealous of your electric bike. I've ridden one and they're amazing. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that there is no transportation project more critical to the town of Simsbury and the village of Terrafil than this Terrafil Connector. And that's why on the Board of Selectmen, we recently allocated about $300,000 for the design work on one of the most tricky stretches that goes along the river. I've funded this project every single opportunity that we've gotten, and as a state legislator, I will do everything I can to make sure that Simsbury has the money to bring this project to fruition. But it's also beyond that. I think about the investments that we made on, as a member of the Board of Selectmen and as first selectman, in our sidewalk infrastructure. Unprecedented investments, about $200,000 a year, right along West Street. We're also going to be connecting West Street all the way along Firetown Road to the middle school. We redid the sidewalks around Squadron Line School. So these, it's beyond the trails and beyond the paths. It's our sidewalks. It's putting bike lanes and sharrows so cars know to be on the lookout for bikes. And this is an area where, you know, when we put feet on sidewalks or bike wheels on roads, it's dollars in the pockets of small businesses on Main Street. So the more of this we can do, it's great for exercise, it's great for business, and it's something that I would continue to invest in significantly if I'm given the privilege to serve as your next state legislator.
Okay, we have a question here about the bear explosion in Simsbury.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
And it mentions here that Litchfield County has a limited bear hunting season to control the bear population. And the question is, would you support a limited bear hunting season for Hartford County and Simsbury? And if not, why? And this goes to you, Mr. Wellman, first.
I think with many challenges, again, it's helpful to look at what's working in other places. What do they do to manage the bear population in Colorado, in Massachusetts, in Vermont, and Maine? So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. One of the things that we learned was that the state of Connecticut has no statewide prohibition on feeding wild animals. And that's why in Simsbury we passed a wildlife feeding ordinance that actually has served as a blueprint and a model for other towns that have essentially copied it, such as Granby. But the problem is that the bears don't know where the border of Granby is or Canton is. And that's why we can't deal with this as a patchwork of 169 towns. This needs to have strong statewide policy, and we need to start with the data, and we need to see what works in other places. I am always going to prioritize non-lethal methods, but I am willing to consider anything if the data and the experiences of other places bears that out. So I hope that answers the question.
So I'm going to give a plug actually out to our Republican colleague, Mike Payne. The first thing we can do about the bears is the Payne Bear Lock lid. It has definitely made life easier and less messy in the morning. No matter how much they throw those things around, it works. So that's number one. But number two, we have a no wildlife feeding ordinance here in the town of Simsbury. Because I came to the Board of Selectmen, what was it, 2019, because my dog had been attacked, my dog Boone, had been attacked by 4 coyotes and just, over here on Orchard Lane. And we had a neighbor who was intentionally feeding the coyote population. And despite nice requests from me and from our neighbors and from our animal control officer, refused to do so. So Tammy Wachowski, Angela Shigdinis, and I came to the Board of Selectmen, and we made a presentation, and we talked about the coyote population and the bear population. And sure enough, Board of Selectmen decided to take a look at it and made a study, and now we have a Don't Feed the Wildlife ordinance, and that's something that we need statewide. Obviously, my dog Boone's tail is this big now, but he made it through. But we are, one child away from a real tragedy happening in our town right now. So this is an urgent issue. I know that Eric and I are, Mr. Wellman and I.
You can call me Eric.
Mr. Wellman and I are actually in complete agreement on this issue.
Thank you. We're going to switch back to people now. With LGBTQ plus rights looking to be next on the chopping block, how do you plan on ensuring rights and protections for this community? What would be your objectives for LGBTQ plus rights? Ms. Osborne.
So my objective for any constitutional right that's been eviscerated by the Supreme Court is exactly the same, whether it's for LGBTQ rights, whether for it's a woman's right to choose, or issues about gun safety. And that is that we need people in the legislature with a long proven commitment to the values that we share on all of these topics, and who has the advocacy experience and the experience at the state legislature in getting these things done. I have been a passionate policy advocacy at the legislature for years. I have worked on breast cancer screening legislation. I was very involved in facilitating getting Jennifer's Law passed last year. And as the parent of an LGBTQ child, nothing is more important to me than making sure that his rights are protected and that not be jeopardized for him, that he should be able to love who he loves. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to pass that one to Eric.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Osborne. I think about when we did the Rainbow Walkway. It was my first or second year on the Board of Selectmen. I learned so much about our community when we did that. I did not know what the response was going to be. And I was blown away by how much love I saw in our community when people came down with their spray cans and legally graffitied the sidewalk in the most beautiful of ways. And I think about, the Supreme Court and what the Supreme Court has done this year. And, who would have known that Roe v. I mean, might have seemed crazy that Roe v. Wade could be overturned a couple of years ago, but no one should be surprised at what the Supreme Court does now. I think gay marriage could very well be next, and that's not fear-mongering. It's just facing the reality of the political climate that we live in, and we need to do everything that we can to make gay marriage and LGBT rights sticky, as sticky as possible, codifying into state law, state statute, the Constitution, if possible, because gay rights, LGBTQ plus rights are human rights, and Connecticut is not a welcoming place for any of us if it's not a welcoming place for all of us.
May I follow up?
Yes.
So, to me, it is not at all a surprise that Roe v. Wade has been overturned by the Supreme Court, and I've been talking about that for years. I've been raising the alarm bells about Roe v. Wade for years. When everybody else said, Melissa, it's settled law, it's precedent, as an attorney, I was looking at the Supreme Court and I was watching what was coming down the pike, and I'd hoped I was wrong. It's actually worse. So I have a long history of stepping up against an anti-choice legislature to run a race that was considered unwinnable and has been unwinnable, but I know that progress and change is incremental. That's how we eat the elephant, one bite at a time. So I am proud to have stepped up for our values. I am proud to have been a voice of opposition to anti-choice, anti-gun safety, and anti-LGBTQ votes that were coming out of our then state senator, or now state senator, who's elected not to run again this time. It's important that as Democrats, we fight for our values even when we think they're not in jeopardy.
Thank you. I have two questions here that are sort of related. One is about, as a candidate, should a candidate for office disclose all their conflicts of interest and their associations? And the other is about, once you're in the General Assembly, it's a low-paying part-time job, and it requires it's really a full-time job, even though it's paid as part-time. And how can you balance your availability to serve the Assembly, to pay attention to your constituents, communicate with your constituents, and then have a family life and work obligations as well? So, Mr. Wellman, if you can digest all of that, that's good.
Sure, no, I wrote it down. On the topic of conflicts of interest, yes, 100% they should be disclosed. On the topic of the ability to, I think of the three legs of the stool: my family, my paid employer, and of course my public service. And I'm so fortunate to have an employer that is willing to give me the time in order to serve the people of Connecticut.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne?
Absolutely, conflicts of interest should be disclosed. I'm not exactly sure what kinds of conflicts candidates encounter. Was there anything more specific on that question, or?
No, I guess full disclosure would be.
Well, I guess my full disclosure is that I'm a member of the Connecticut Bar Association.
Yeah.
I was the vice chair of the Child Welfare Juvenile Law Committee. I'm on the Family Law Section Legislative Subcommittee. So I don't think that's a conflict of interest, but those are my associations. I think that the next part of the question was, will we have time to do this job? Now, the person who is stepping down that's resulting in this open race, one of the hallmarks of his 20 years of service here in the town of Simsbury was his constituent service. And I'm proud to have John Hampton's endorsement. And I know that one of the reasons that John is supporting me, among others, is he knows that I'll make constituent service a priority. He knows that as a small business owner and an attorney, frankly, if I don't take care of my clients, I don't eat. So he knows that it is part of who I am and what I do. My personal life and my work life, I have one child left at home. I raised 4 children. They are ages 17 to 27. They're all over the world now, except the one who's left at home is heading into his senior year of high school. So I'm about to be an empty nester. And after having 4 kids at home, having one's more like a pet. I can do that one. And because I'm a small business owner and I own my own practice, I have the flexibility to serve in the General Assembly. I can change the types of cases I take depending upon the time of year. I can litigate during the off season. I can do mediation and collaborative work during sessions, so that I have time not to attend just the General Assembly votes and committee meetings, but to do the constituent service that is such a significant part of this role.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move to the next question, can I just get a time check? How much time does Mr. Wellman have left?
Oh, he has a little more than 8 minutes.
A little more than 8 minutes. And Ms. Osborne, how
I
much
need
time
to be
does she-
quiet because
What? Oh, 2.5 minutes
This
left?
is going to be a test of my ability to
All right.
filibuster.
So, Ms. Osborne, we're going to ask you to speak quickly for the
There you
next
go.
few questions. Okay. Okay. Do you have any thoughts on how the state and specifically the legislature has handled the COVID crisis as we enter a new school year and with another very contagious disease, monkeypox, headed here? What, if anything, do you think state government should do?
Is that a Ms. Osborne question?
Yes.
Keeping my time short, I think Governor Lamont did a really good job getting us through the COVID crisis. I think that people are used to using masks when they need to use masks, and I would encourage people to continue to do that since I have 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Governor Lamont did a laudable job in getting our state through the crisis. I know at the time when the COVID-19 crisis struck, I was first selectman of Simsbury, and I was thinking back to those early days when we provided daily updates to our residents and a press conference when the time was just so scary, when we didn't know what this was, how long it was going to be around, or even how to prevent it. Could we get it by touching food at the supermarket? My approach is going forward is we have to continue to rely on our public health partners. The Farmington Valley Health District locally was an incredible partner. We need to continue to rely on data. We need to continue to support our teachers who have been at the front line of managing COVID while trying to help our kids continue to learn in a hybrid, in-person, and sometimes remote environment. We need to make sure that our first responders are continue to be vaccinated and boosted as the science suggests. And I think the theme that you hear here is that we need to continue to rely on our public health partners. These decisions need to be driven by public health officials, not by politicians, supported by politicians, not driven by politicians.
All right. Each year, DDS budgets are cut to eliminate critical support services for people with disabilities. Mr. Wellman, how would you be an advocate for this population to secure critical funding?
When I think about people who have disabilities, there's several areas of focus. One is education, one is transportation, another is housing. And I think one of the challenges we have is that there are so many non-governmental organizations and governmental organizations that are playing in this space. And as a family with a newly diagnosed child with autism, for example, it can be so overwhelming knowing where to turn and who to turn to. And that's why I've been spending time with members of our Aging and Disability Commission to make sure that I'm as educated as possible on these issues. As I said before, I think that when Connecticut works better for people who have disabilities, it actually works better for everybody who lives here. Part of that means making sure that school districts have sufficient funds for special education. There are many components, but I think when we look at this issue and its component parts, we use data, we look at what's working elsewhere, and we bring the right voices and advocates to the table, we can make a difference.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne?
Can I see how much time I have? I thought I had 2 minutes to begin with. Oh, okay, all right, great. So, one of the important, 2.5, okay, I will only use 13, that's impressive, okay. So one of the most difficult times for families with disabilities is as their children start to age and grow up. And one of the important things for them is being able to give them the freedom and also the safety and structure that they need. And that's one of the reasons that I advocated on the zoning commission recently for an expanded size of accessory dwelling unit, so that that can happen. And one of the other places that we do need to focus, as Mr. Wellman said, is in schools, because one of the jobs of your state representative is to advocate for resources at the state level to bring home here to Simsbury. And the funding that is needed for the resources and the social and emotional learning skills that are important in school, not just for the ABCs, but for the additional skills sets that are needed for kids with disabilities are really important to fund. And that's the job of the state rep. It's not to be the Board of Education. It's not to be the Aging and Disability Committee. It is to partner with them here in Simsbury and to seek out the resources that they need to get their jobs done.
All right. Ms. Osborne first. If elected, how would you encourage your constituents to learn about and participate in the legislative process? How would you plan to communicate with the constituents of the 16th district, and be as specific as you can, please?
The ability to communicate has changed so drastically in the last 10 years. Whether it's a newsletter that goes out in MailChimp every week, social media, and partnering with our journalists in the area to make sure that we're updating the constituents in the area on the activities at the legislature. As a state rep, I would want to meet with various commissions and the political committees of both flavors, both parties, to make sure, because once elected, I'd be the state representative for everybody in Simsbury.
Mr. Wellman.
I want to be the most accessible representative in history, and I'll do that by giving you my cell phone number right now. Get out a piece of paper. 860-424-1323. Call or text me, and I'm serious. I've given my cell phone number out. It's on everything that I send out to our residents. I'll give it to anybody, and that's not a work cell phone, it's my personal cell phone. And that's because if you have a problem, if you have an issue, if there's any possible way that I can help, I want you to call or text me. Other channels that I've used as first selectman very effectively, we're a big Facebook town. Not everybody's on the internet, so I think it's important that we continue to use other forms of communication, email and other kinds of newsletters. But it's so gratifying to see a full room of people here tonight, because it means you're engaged in the democratic process. And the more people that are engaged, the stronger our democracy. We say democracy is not a spectator sport. We all need to get involved, and anything that I can do to educate our residents about the most pressing issues in Hartford that impact Simsbury, that impact the state of Connecticut, I want to hear your voice, and that's why I give my cell phone out.
Okay, we come now to the final question. And we'll start with you, Mr. Wellman. Why should people vote for you to be the Democratic candidate for the 16th District? What do you uniquely bring to the position?
Yeah, thank you. I think I went into this debate believing strongly that we need Democrats right now at every single level of government, now more than ever. And this debate is really a case in point of why we need Democrats at every level. Listening to, what I've shared hopefully has resonated, and Ms. Osborne, what you've shared has also resonated with me. We need Democrats right now at every level, but we also need Democrats who can win. I've already defeated the Republican opponent that one of us will be facing this fall. I beat him before anybody even knew who I was. It was my very first election. I won that election by 34 votes. Since then, I've won my next election by more than 900 votes, and my margin has only increased when I put my name on the ballot. I strongly believe that I serve the best chance of keeping this district in Democratic hands, and I will proudly continue to fight for this district, bringing strong, progressive leadership to Simsbury and the state of Connecticut.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne?
So the reason we're having a primary is that Eric and I hold the exact same belief that we are both the strongest candidates the Democrats can put up this fall. And I have the data to back it up. I ran the hardest race we have in this district against a very popular Republican incumbent in an election in which 90% of our voters turned out. Yes, Eric has beaten Mike Payne before in a municipal election which roughly 33% of our voters turned out in a year where Trump had just been elected and our Republican opponent had taken some actions against our own Mary Glassman. I am the highest Connecticut Democrat vote getter in any opposed race in Simsbury history. Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and it makes it only more likely at this point that people will cross the aisle to vote for a Democrat.
Ms. Osborne, I think your time is up.
All done.
Okay. Am I able to respond? If there's
Do you have time?
Okay. No, just this morning, the Hartford Current had a story on this debate and this election, and they pointed out that this record-setting election was an election that Ms. Osborne didn't win. I've never lost an election, and I'm not going to lose this November.
Thank you to the candidates for participating in this exchange of ideas this evening and to help educate the residents of the 16th District. And thank you to the League Timers and to all of you for coming tonight. We also want to thank Simsbury Community Media for streaming this event and making rebroadcasts available. Tonight's program has been live streamed and is available at simsburytv.org and also at youtube.com/simsburytv/live. Good night to you all, and please remember to vote in the primary election on August 9th. Thank you.
Thank you.